Are you ready for your morning Greek lesson? Good. Because you can't understand this unless you understand a little Greek. This parable, I think, drives everyone who hears it a little crazy. I mean, it just isn't fair. I mean, this poor schlep of a servant, he's got, first of all, the master gives the talents. What's a talent? That's a Greek word, of course. And it isn't a denomination or a coin. It's a weight of silver. It's so much silver. These were probably silver talents. Those were the most common. But it was so much silver that it had to be weighed out. It was a weight of silver. So this was in the thousands and thousands of dollars. It's kind of hard to say what it would be in modern terms, but it was a huge amount of money. One of the servants gets 10 talents, one gets 5. These are the servants who are pretty sharp. But the third one, remember that the master gave to each according to his ability. This one was the loser of the group. He wasn't that smart. He gets 1 talent. So he's pretty incompetent to begin with. Then the master comes back and takes accounts. And the servant who had a pretty good estimate of his own abilities, he brings the 1 talent, here's your money back. And the master becomes angry. He says, you know that I was a hard man. You should have at least given it to the bankers where there'd be some interest. And he says, take the talent, take that measure of silver, and give it to the one who has 10. Because the one who has will get more, and the one who has not will have everything taken away. And he says, then throw that servant, that useless servant outside. That's pretty harsh. I mean, really. The word isn't servant. I don't know where they translate it servant. The word in Greek is doulos, which means slave. This is a slave. And that changes the whole context. A man going on a journey called in his slaves and entrusted his possessions to them. A man is going to entrust his possessions to his slaves? Well, that's kind of odd. You have to understand slavery in the ancient world. Our most recent experience of slavery in this country is a race slavery, where people of African origin were kidnapped in Africa and then sold into slavery in the Americas. And it was one of the most outrageous institutions in history. They had no rights whatsoever. There were different kinds of slavery in the ancient world, and it's important for this parable to understand the context in which Jesus said it. There were different kinds of slavery in the ancient world. There was war slavery. In other words, you'd be captured in battle and sold into slavery. That was where generals made most of their money, by selling captives caught in battle. And that meant you'd never see your homeland again, most probably. It was a very harsh kind of slavery. There was political slavery, which was also terribly harsh. As a political punishment, you were sold into hard bondage, and it was often in the galleys and in the mines, and it was a certain death sentence. You'd be dead within 6 months if you were sold into slavery in the mines. But the most common kind of slavery that Jesus would have been talking about in the Near East was debt slavery. In other words, you maxed out your ancient Roman credit cards or whatever they did it with, and, well, you sold yourself into slavery to pay the debt. There was another kind of slavery that was very unusual. People who had talent, who had ability, talent in our sense, they would sell themselves into slavery in order to eat. Seriously. For instance, especially well-educated Greeks would sell themselves into slavery to wealthy Roman families as tutors for the children, as kind of the librarian for the household, the teacher for the household, because eating in the ancient world was a real problem. This is something we don't perceive. Coming from such a wealthy country in a wealthy world, eating was a serious problem. You lived in a village, and you lived in what was essentially a mud hut, and well, if the rains didn't come for a year, you starved to death. Death by hunger was a very common way to die in the ancient world. And if you had anything going for you, well, it was just smarter to be a slave in a wealthy household. Slaves in wealthy households lived better than free men in outlying country villages. So if you were a scholar, if you had any talent, ability, you might seriously sell yourself into slavery, and you'd save the money you made by the purchase, and you might make tips and a little money here. You might have a few concerns. There are even stories in Rome of slaves owning slaves. And then you saved enough, you bought your freedom, and had a nice retirement. So slavery was different in the ancient world. There were different kinds of slavery. So what Jesus is talking about probably is debt slavery. And this was a social contract. That's why St. Paul says, slaves, honor your masters. You've entered into a contract. Debt slavery was in a certain sense voluntary. And it had its responsibilities. Now, in that context, think about this. Jesus told this parable. A man going into a journey called in his slaves, and he entrusted his possessions to them. Then one doubles the talents, he makes 5 talents, he doubles it to another 2, he doubles it. And the third one, he does nothing with it. And then the master calls him in and says, wicked, lazy slave. Now, when we think of slavery, a lazy slave is a good idea. Why slave for this person? Well, remember, this is a different kind of slavery, most probably. It's a slavery that's a social contract. It's very interesting to notice the punishment for the wicked and lazy slave. Have you ever noticed that? It seems harsh that he says, well, take the silver, the talent, from the one who made nothing and give it to the one who has 10. Think about this. Those slaves had nothing that did not first belong to their master. They belonged to their master, and the silver he had given them was theirs. In other words, that master took nothing from the slave that belonged to the slave. He took what was his own and gave it to someone who would do well with it. This isn't a gift. This isn't, here, take this talent and have a good time with it. No, you're in charge of that silver. And I want you now, you got 5, you've invested it, you made 5 more, now you got 11. You take care of that money. So nothing was taken from the slave who had 1 talent. But then what's the ultimate punishment? Throw this useless servant into the darkness outside, where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. And herein, I think, is the most important message for us.